Good morning, Keith. If it's okay, I'll send you these two and you can tell me if this is an okay method of communication. The idea is that you can use these videos to play to the fellows and then they'll see the cut of my jib and they can say if it's somebody they want on board. I can tell you what motivates me into this, in truth, Keith, is influencing government policy. I can make a direct connection from my experience from the coalface of 20 years in highway maintenance as consultant, contractor and client. I can bring I've experienced the whole window of my profession of highway maintenance. And in there, it's given me an incredible insight into the impact of government policy on my team. And that's measured in how happy they are, and that an unhappy team is a member of a society that commits suicide. So that I can put a link together between the annual budget cycle and suicides in the nation. And that if I set the benchmark as target zero suicides, I can build a government policy based on that single measure. And in fact, when you look at it, all government policy can be founded upon that single target zero. Because what I've been looking for is what can unite us in this country. I've had 8 years of feeling of my voice is silenced, and that the Brexit and Remain vote was such a lie. It was the votes that we voted for were bad option or least bad option, because Remain was a bad option, because we desperately needed change. We were heading nowhere in this country. The coalition government of the Liberals and the Conservatives destroyed the last chance for a modern democracy in terms of proportional representation. And that was removed from us. So it was watered down to nothing. And then the Daily Mail said, no, you can't, you don't want that, do you? You wouldn't understand it. And so it was a referendum about it, for goodness sake. A referendum about proportional representation. Now, this is where I'm coming from in terms of my strategic thinking. And it's my strategic thinking, I think, that is me, regardless of what position I'm employing. When I was working as the resurfacing manager for Caerphilly Council, I was doing the head of infrastructure's job for him. He didn't ask me to do this, but because I understood what the head of infrastructure's task was and what his brief was and how he was going to be measured in his performances, I made sure that my contract just delivered everything for him. And if at any time the head of infrastructure asked me about my contract, because he's dealing with councillors, he knew I'd be able to give him that information really quickly, really nicely formatted, ready for presentation at council. And so it's because I was only doing it was a £2 million contract, so a small contract to manage and simple, but nonetheless, because I was able to apply strategic thinking to it from the senior level, it made everyone's life easier, including the head of infrastructures, my manager, the manager underneath him, then me, and then my team. And I found that the people that I worked with were happy. My contractors were my team. I was the one person on the job who was Caerphilly, everyone else was a contractor. And so I was the linchpin and the driver. I saw myself as the driver and the happy team. Now, I can make an extremely good case to you fellows for the policy that we should be influencing the government on right now. And I only invite you to go and look at the suicide figures. And that when you want to know where I'm coming from in terms of my heart, there's a friend in the village whose son killed himself a year and a half ago. And he's had an accident before that where he had a fall and his brain is hurt. He was a builder. And we were talking, we would connect on all sorts of ways, plus he did my windows. And he came into me yesterday while I was having a conversation about that target zero suicide was the only measure to 2 customers in my shop. He came into my shop and he said, Martin, it's happened again. And I knew what he was going to say. And what he said was that his nephew, who had fought in Afghanistan, was a veteran of that campaign, which is being airbrushed from history shamefully. Absolutely shamefully. The treatment of the troops in Afghanistan and the people we left there is the deepest shame, Keith, I've ever experienced for my country. And I won't wear it without speaking up for that team, because there's going to be suicides amongst the veterans of Afghanistan. because there already is. And it's Dick's nephew, who killed himself yesterday at 46 years old because he couldn't handle the PTSD which he'd been diagnosed with from the Afghanistan campaign. Now, if we don't love those soldiers, Keith, immediately our job as the people of this country is to love those soldiers, and so they feel loved and valued. As far as I was concerned, they were fighting for the rights of women to be educated, which was a fight worth dying for. And I wasn't being asked to die for it. I was doing my job. But those boys were doing the job that I wanted them to do. And if they died in that process, I grieved for them and for their families. But I knew that that loss was righteous and valiant. The actions that the government have taken since the fall of Kabul have been so shameful, so deeply, deeply shameful to me, that I've had to remove myself from the government entirely. And in my shop, I'm playing a game where I've declared myself Prince of Wales, because I believe that democracy is dead, and that the government policy we should really be influencing is the one that we have a historical and constitutional right to right now, Keith. And it's that if the king is weak on the throne of England, he's vulnerable. If a knight rises from the peasantry with wisdom, an engineer, someone with the heart and morality of love and God, but with the mind of an engineer, and the intelligence to understand how suicides can be stopped in a planet by having people feel they're valued. It's just about being valued, Keith. So we could do this. I'm going to claim I'm Prince of Wales. I'm son of Glyndŵr. I'm Heisenberg's bane. I intend to promote myself into this position, and I've been building up my YouTube videos, my Reynolds BN YouTube videos, as my manifesto, as a philosophy it's intended to be. The early ones are there's my journey to this, and then you can see the madness and how difficult it is for me to grapple with the quantum issues that I'm dealing with. And you can see how I struggle and how I piece things together, because my provenance for my theory about quantum, which is E equals m over c squared, is my journey to that point. And someone's got to choose to take that journey. If I can get people to rally to my standard, to my new country of Great Britain, we seize the day for peace. And that Wales is on our flag at last, in the centre. That we claim our right to be on our new flag in the centre as a dragon. The green and red dragon uniting the Northmen of Ulster and ourselves in blood fealty. That we will not allow a border between ourselves and our brothers in Northern Ireland. And therefore we insist here in Wales that we are a signatory to the Windsor Agreement. I insist upon it. And if you will not grant it, Charles, as your last act as he stands down, he could give us his message of peace that bears his name and his mother's name to us here in the Kingdom of Great Britain, where Queen Elizabeth's reign will reign forever, Keith, because she's going to stay. She's the Queen still here for me because she is moral. The King is immoral. I reject him. Now, I believe I can call people to my side and that we can create the Zoom meeting democracy. We have the 600 chairs, and that the game of living in Great Britain is to win a chair. And we set up education and to enable people to win a chair. If people aren't interested in winning a chair, then they don't have to go to school. They can just do their 15-hour working week that we're working towards. There's lots to do now, but that they just choose what they want to do, and that everything is taken care of. Nobody owns anything. Every single thing is Crown property owned by the Prince of Wales. And I'll hold the centre while I set up the model, and it's going to be based on the NEC3 of the systems and processes that I have designed off the back of NEC3, and it's really it's not the detail. It's the first paragraphs. It's all I build it on, always. It's all I ever need, and I'm going to build my laws based on that. Headlines. The 1974 Health and Safety Act is going to be replaced. Everything under that act is going to be removed. Every single thing is going to be removed, and you're going to be given a single sentence. You are the one responsible for your health and safety. 1. 2. Do not endanger the health and safety of others without their consent. Full stop. And that's it. That is my health and safety law. Now, on the back of that, I just build the process that shows how you go through risk assessment. And the whole point of a risk assessment is that you're safer. If you end up with a risk assessment which has a man with a shovel holding a piece of paper which says he's carrying the risk, that's not a risk assessment. That's a delegation of duty. a delegation of responsibility. And when you've witnessed what happens when you try to exist in that system, when somebody gets hurt, when one of your blokes gets hurt and is crying in pain, literally, and in help, please, my God, I can't afford to be out of work. And then you find that the company turns around and says, no, it was your fault. Because he hadn't done his work boots up to the top hole. He'd left the top 2 holes of his work boots unlaced. And he twisted his ankle as he was moving a sign, doing TM. Just turned, it's one of those things, you turn, carrying a weight, and it just snapped. And they abandoned him, Keith. The company sent him a bowl of fruit in the hospital as he was learning that he'd lost his job. Pretty much. Because they could blame him, it meant it was his fault, and therefore they could sack him and they were clean and the shareholders were happy. Now, Keith, I can't, that was what I mean about why I left the system. Because a man with integrity cannot work under that system, and I've left. Now, I believe I have real value to add as a professional engineer. My experience is almost second to none in terms of the breadth that I've experienced. And I've heard, and I've learned something the other day, Keith, that really cheered me up, is that the saying has been excised, and that the actual saying is this: a jack of all trades is master of none, but oftentimes better than master of one. And that's where I lay my hat, in that ring. It's the jack of all trades. So now I hope we're clear, okay, Keith, and there's nothing underhand here, and that the historical move I'm making is historical. The history begins today. If it's proven true what I'm saying in quantum, and I know it will be, then the future begins. Now, I've got one more thing, and then I'll go. My thesis that I spoke to you about on the phone that I did on bending moments in elevated cylindrical water tanks is the theory of everything. I knew that it was because it's all bending moments. The double bending moment of light describes the reality mechanism. It's the M4 in which all the action takes place, and that the bending moment, the M4, is actually somewhere else. So that the units of E equals M over C squared are E is entropy, right? And it's never quite 1 and never quite 0. It's, you do the limit sign to never quite 1 to never quite 0, equals 2 pi times 10 to the 42 meters to the 4. Yeah. And then with a Q on it, that's the quantum. And at the bottom, the quantum appears in the front of it's a Q seconds squared. Yeah, which is the C squared, the squared space of time and light. My thesis describes that exactly, because it talks about shell theory. My formulas were built on the scientific work of shell theory, and that shell theory seems to have become an unapproved topic, Keith. And I'd like you to look at this in all seriousnness, because I think there's something really important here. Dr. V. Lewe, L-E-W-E, in 1915 published some work regarding the use of coefficients to simplify complex simultaneous equations to enable people who are not quite so mathematically literate as he was to carry out computations to work out the reinforcement in these tanks, which is important because it's got to be right. And he wrote this paper, and it was ridden roughshod over by a Mr. H. Reisner, and his name has been erased from history. And that my biggest concern that I found yesterday, so it was a piece of detective work that I did in 2008 in your library in the Institute of Civil Engineers, and I think I've come across a piece of anti-Semitism that may be affecting engineering judgments. So not anti-Semitism against any individuals. I'm just saying I'm identifying an anti-Semitic act. This clearly seems to be something wrong. Can we look at it? Because there's engineering problem there. So that in 1927, Carpenter published a work on this, on the same problem, referencing Lewe's work. But he misspelled his name to Lewis, Lewes, anglicising it, in 1927. Now, in 1927 in Germany, what was happening was that the double slit had just been discovered, and that Bohr, Heisenberg, and Einstein are hopping around a room going, bloody hell, we found the theory of everything. Yeah, the quantum is magic once you know what you're looking at, and only very few people do. They did. I do. Now, the coincidence cannot be a coincidence. But at that moment, Leve's name is excised from history because what he's working on is shell theory. E equals mc squared, Heisenberg's trick with the coefficients, is exactly the same. It is shell theory in a slightly different format, just the way he's using it, but the crossover is enormous between the two. Heisenberg has to silence Leve and reference this other guy, Reisner, the white guy, because he's about to Aryanize physics. It's the moment when the Jews are driven away, and Leve, notice, looks like a Jewish name to me. I haven't looked him up, and I thought so at the time. When I wrote that, I was quite angry, and I phrased my writing in that way. So I'd like that to be investigated, and I'm going to see if I can find, if you can find a copy of my thesis on my records, that'd be brilliant, and just have a look at it in this light, because I think what I've done is that I found that physics has interfered in engineering, Keith. Theoretical physicists have got their fingers in our pie there, and I think we should look at it really closely, because I think we'll find a world of wonder when we do. Yeah. So I've got two things I'm bidding for with you, my friends at the Institute. I want to influence government policy so much that we are the government, the Institute. We just take over. We can use the card we have in quantum. If you can prove this to be true, and we have these two ideas coinciding at this moment here in South Wales and in Great Britain, history actually begins right now. The future starts. We just take over the country as engineers, and we ask the army and the police to stand by us. If they don't, then they don't. The ones who do, they're on our team. We just work with them. We just we ignore the others. Immediately, people will rally to our standard. If we rule the country with the truth of E equals M over C squared, with the love and morality of God in our hearts and our total understanding of engineering and how to do things without killing people, we've got a planet worth living on, and I think it's worth a go, and I'm doing it. I'm playing that game, and I'm playing it to my death, so wish me luck. Okay, a long one, as usual, but it's easier when I do them on video, because you can tell me to shut up and push the button. It's very satisfying. Love rules. Do the work. Cheers.